Hey everyone, today's video is about how to be a great surgery medical student. This video serves two purposes. One, it's going to have some general advice for anyone to be a medical student on surgery, but it will also have some specific details about if you're rotating with me. And so, if you are a medical student coming onto my service, I will expect you to have watched this video and come prepared. And while that might seem like I'm asking you to do more, it actually will hopefully be helpful for you as too frequently we see medical students come onto a rotation and it's 2 or 3 or 4 days before anyone from the team has a chance to really sit down with them and explain how things work. And so those are 2 or 3 days that are somewhat wasted when you could have had a good sense of what the expectations are and how to make the most of your time on a rotation. So I don't mean for this to be burdensome. Hopefully, it is in fact helpful. So first, just a quick overview of what a day on surgery actually looks like. Um, Typically, that involves getting to the hospital quite early, as you've probably heard, at least in rumors around your medical school. Pre-rounds are typically rounds done by medical students themselves, where they go see the patients that they're following. And then shortly after that, there are resident rounds. Again, these are quite early, frequently around like 6 a.m. or something like that. And the reason we have to get up so early is because in the middle of our day, instead of like a medicine service, just having to go around on our patients, we actually have a whole lot of other responsibilities that happen during the day itself, such as going to the operating room all day or being in clinic, sometimes both. At some point, the attendings do have to see our patients, the attending surgeons, but we may or may not be involved with them, depending on the service. Then finally, we usually go around in the evening and check on all our patients again and make sure they're doing okay, that the plans we came up with on our morning rounds actually got followed through on during the day, etc. And so, what does a medical student have to do during each of these aspects of a surgical day? Well, anytime there's rounds, you should be prepared to present. Like I said, the pre rounds are really rounds just for you. That's where you go see your patients, ask them how they're doing, and then you can use that data along with the data you get from your computer to prepare your presentation. But then on resident rounds or attending rounds or even evening rounds, you should be prepared to efficiently and effectively present those patients. We do have another video on how to do those patient presentations that you can look at for some guidance on that. In the operating room, basically, you're just expected to be present, to observe. You can help with some minor aspects of the procedure. Initially, it will be quite minor, where you're mostly watching or maybe doing things like cutting suture, although we try to get you involved as much as possible as soon as we can. You'll also be asked questions in the operating room, so you want to be prepared for those. These are usually related to the reasons that the operations are being done or at specific questions about the anatomy involved in the procedure. And then in clinic, basically, just like any other clinic, you're expected to be there, see patients either in more of a shadowing capacity or potentially by yourself, depending on the specific circumstance. So let's talk about a little bit more detail of some of these basics of being a great medical student. So, first, following patients. Some of the common questions are: how do I know which patients to follow? How many patients should I follow? What are the responsibilities that come with following a given patient? So, to start with, the simplest question is probably which patients to follow. Usually, what's most educational for you is to follow a patient throughout their time course in the hospital. So, usually, the patients you want to follow are patients whose operations you got to see and experience, and then you can also follow up on their post-operative trajectory and their post-operative care. If you don't have any patients that have stayed, maybe your patients had same day surgeries and left, etc., you can always ask your residents who might be a good example of some of the inpatients on the service for you to follow. How many? Definitely, I advise starting lighter as opposed to heavier here. I know a lot of medical students, and especially those that want to go into surgery, think that more is better, and they're eager to prove how good they are by how many patients they can follow. But I promise you that I and most of my colleagues are going to be more impressed with quality than quantity. So definitely start off light. I recommend maybe one, maybe two patients at the beginning. And then you can scale that up as needed. But again, I want to emphasize that rather than just taking on more patients at a med student level, instead learning to function more like an intern is going to be what actually impresses your residents and is actually sustainable. So again, I'd start off with maybe one, maybe slowly bumped up to two patients. I probably wouldn't go any higher than 3 to 4 patients as a medical student, even if you're an AI or something like that. So once again, do less, but do it better, and that's going to be more impressive for us to see, and it is more efficient for the team too, because you having efficient, really well done presentations on a few patients takes less time and is a bit less disruptive to the overall workflow. And then the responsibilities you have, again, for each patient that you have, you're going to have to pre-round on them. You'll have to present that patient on rounds. You should write that patient's note, and you'll want to follow up on the plans for that patient throughout the day. For example, if we order any additional labs or imaging studies for that patient to have, you want to make sure that those things get done and let us know when that happens. All right, some more basics. Be a team player. Obviously, some of this is just kind of interpersonal dynamics and depends on you and depends on the specific team. But a few things I just want to point out. One, just show up and be there. This sounds almost nonsensical to say, but with the amount of demands on your guys' time as med students nowadays, with more and more formal didactics and lectures and different sites and continuity clinics, etc., we get to see you guys less and less than we ever used to. And even just having you there, the only way that you're typically going to learn in medicine is by being present and observing what's going on. And so, as much as you can, just show up and be there with your team. And that's going to be important both for your learning and it shows us that you're interested. Enthusiasm, again, you don't have to be over the top with this, but and it kind of goes with the next bullet about minimizing complaining. Surgery is hard. I don't think anybody would argue that. And your residents and yourself will be pushed to your limit by your surgery rotation. And it's really easy to go in a negative spiral where you're just complaining about how early you have to get to work, how much work there is to do, etc. But while it's important to vent, it's easy to take that too far. And I do recommend, especially when you're a med student, to kind of ease up in the complaining and show a little bit of enthusiasm for the rotation. And just remember that's really easy to come off the wrong way if you're complaining as a medical student because usually your residents have it much worse than you do when it comes to hours worked and amount of work to get done throughout the day and how much home call they take and how they've worked 21 days in a row and that's even longer than your whole rotation, etc. So just it's really easy to rub your residents the wrong way by complaining. So I recommend taking it easy on that. And then finally, unfortunately, these tasks become less and less as medical care has become more and more kind of regulated and supervised, but there's fewer and fewer tasks for you to help out with. So the ones that you can, usually things like going to check on a patient, calling a nursing floor, etc. Just see if there's anything you can help your team with, and then if we do give you something to do, just take it on and make sure it gets done. And that's kind of the best way you can help out your team. All right, more basics. The list. The list has archaic as it seems in this digital world. The hospital runs by killing trees. Tons and tons of paper lists are printed every day at a hospital, and you, just like your residents, need to always have a list, or at the very least, a sheet of paper if you don't even have access to a list on your first day, and a pen on you at all times. If you don't do this, I promise you'll regret it. Um, some of the most basic things to use your list for. If you've got a patient and we assign you a task related to that patient or any other patient, I recommend putting a little box and then that task by that patient's name on the list. And then once you've done that task, you cross it off. If you don't do this, you will forget tasks. I promise you. And especially the farther along you get in training, it becomes absolutely insurmountable to remember all the things you have to do without putting your tasks on a list. But the other really important use for a list as a medical student is that I want you to take anything you hear that goes on in the hospital, whether it's just a word that you've never heard before or some sort of clinical scenario that you don't understand why people are debating it. Anything like that should also get a little box and a description, a little box and writing it out on your list. And that will serve multiple purposes. One, there's a lot of unfortunate downtime in the hospital as a medical student where tasks are waiting to get done. Maybe we're waiting to transfer a patient over, or you're just kind of sitting there watching your team. There's a lot of inefficient time in the hospital, and anytime you have that time, you can take out your phone and start to go through all these little boxes you have on your list and say, "Oh, I was going to read about choledocholithiasis. I don't know what that means." And then you have something to do that's going to improve your education and really get you on your feet rapidly. And that uses that kind of spare dead time in the hospital that would otherwise be wasted. Also, when you're always writing this stuff down, there will be times during the day where either your residents or your attendings turn to you and say, "Hey, do you have any questions?" And the average medical student response is to kind of panic and then not have any questions. And it's kind of an awkward interaction for everyone. But if you have your list with all these questions already written down on it, you can just turn to that and come up with a couple excellent questions that make you look good, make you look engaged, and also, presumably, they're things you actually want to know, will make your education more effective and efficient as well. Finally, just a word on that, a word on questions. There are good and less good questions. Obviously, we want to help you guys as much as we can. And I'm happy to take all the time I can to answer all your questions. However, if it's something that you can easily look up on your own with a quick Google search, those are typically not great questions to ask your residents. But if there's something where it's some sort of nuance of clinical decision making, where you've looked up and understand the basic components already, those are excellent questions where the expertise of your residents and attendings can really help you. Um, but remember, your residents and attendings aren't just your personal Google, right? Like there's some things that are definitely better for you to just quick answer on your own with a quick search. All right, the operating room, kind of the unique aspect of surgery. Very intimidating place for many medical students. A couple basics that will help you get through this. One, just introduce yourself. I was really bad about this as a medical student, and I'd kind of just try to hide in the corner. But usually, the people looking at you funny or, the intimidation of the room, usually all that goes away once you introduce yourself, and you'll find that people are actually quite friendly and helpful. But usually you have to be the one to do it, especially as a medical student, because other people have their own tasks in the OR that they're busy doing. Blue stuff is sterile, so be very careful not to touch anything blue, especially before you're scrubbed. If you do, you can ruin, you know, large amounts of sterile surgical equipment, causing large delays and costs, et cetera, to the hospital. So that's kind of the probably the biggest way you can really mess up as a medical student is contaminating the sterile field. So just be very aware of that when you're in the room. Um, Along with that, well, unrelated. Anyway, yeah, I would say there's some hilarious memes online. There's a lot of reputation that various scrub techs or circulating nurses have, and how they tend to react to medical students. Some of them can be quite rude or just very intimidating to students. And I just want you to remind, like, please cut them some slack. They have to deal with hundreds of medical students every year, and you would be amazed at some of the mistakes and problems that medical students have made before you. And even if you are the best prepared, absolutely most respectful medical students, um, just know that they've had to deal with a lot in their time, and they have to kind of treat you as a completely untrained person until proven otherwise to ensure that their jobs are done correctly and that the patient's protected, the sterile field's protected, etc. So if you ever feel like you get some reaction that was unwarranted, just remember that they have a whole history with medical students, most of which has nothing to do with you. Finally, don't be arrogant. This is a new space for you. You almost certainly are the person in the room that has the least idea what they're doing. So, no matter who the person is or what their role is, if they give you some advice or feedback on what you're doing in the operating room, just humbly accept it. If you don't think it's right, you can ask somebody else about it later. But you don't gain anything by acting arrogant, and usually in that case, you'll be wrong anyway, and it will look doubly bad. And finally, when it comes to actually participating in surgeries and being involved, asking questions, etc., just be sure to read the room. This will usually be quite obvious, but for example, if there's uncontrolled bleeding happening and everyone's stressed and the room's quiet, etc., it's not a great time to break in and ask a question. Overall, I do really want you to be involved in the cases. I want you to be able to keep track of what's going on, have a general sense of what the organs are we're viewing on the field, etc. but there are times where we'll be dealing with some sort of stressful situation in surgery, and those times aren't the best time to ask a question. But otherwise, any time's fair game, and if you're not sure, you can always ask if it's a good time. All right, some more basics. Case prep. This is probably what I get asked about the most from medical students, and they want to know how to best prepare for cases. I will say that these top three bullets are the key points and kind of the fundamentals that will get you 90% of the way there. And the first thing is to just know the specifics about this exact operation. So look up the patient that's getting the operation that you've been assigned and see exactly why they're getting the surgery, the indication for the surgery, as well as the other key information. So the best way to find this is with your preoperative H&P. That's the note done by the surgeon before surgery, either emergently in the hospital right before their operation or in the clinic. If you go to that note, you should be able to quickly and efficiently get a good sense of who is this patient, what's their past medical history, and then in particular, what's their past surgical history, especially in the area where you'll be operating on. So for us, it's typically abdominal surgery that you want to focus on, and then know the operation that they're having and the indication for that operation. And then I really wouldn't stress too much about learning a ton about the surgery itself. What I would stress is learning the anatomy of the space where the operation takes place in. For example, if you're going to watch a gallbladder surgery, read everything you can about the anatomy of that right upper quadrant with the liver, the gallbladder, the portal triad, etc. Because most of the questions asked to med students during operations aren't so much about the operation itself, but are about the anatomy of that space. Additionally, the more you know about the anatomy of the space you're working in, the more you'll be able to follow along with what's going on in the operation, even if we're not doing the best job of explaining it to you at that time. I do think when medical students ask me this question, they're thinking more about the things at the bottom. So where can you find, great videos of these operations, or where can you get resources with the basic steps? And honestly, I haven't found too many great resources of this. Surgical textbooks are pretty long and cumbersome, and I honestly don't even read them for operative case prep very much. Some videos are good, but they're hard to find. We have a few on this channel that could be helpful with case preparation. But another resource I would encourage you is, for example, I love to use the time in the OR while we're waiting for the patient to roll back to review the case that's upcoming with the medical students that are on the service. So if you're on a case with me and we're waiting for the patient to roll back, definitely ask me about the case, tell me what you know and what you don't know, and we can review those at that time. All right, so we've mastered the basics, and at this point, we're talking about what can you do at an advanced level to be an excellent medical student. And again, I don't want you guys to be running before you can walk. Don't worry about any of this advanced stuff until you really, really have those basics down. Um, you can go through a whole rotation. If you just do the basics really well, you will have done a phenomenal job and should get excellent evaluations. But there's always going to be people that want to do a bit more. So when we're talking about what is an advanced medical student, in my eyes, that's a medical student that can be the intern, which is, of course, the role to follow the medical student. So if you're still following with us and you want to know a bit more about that, we'll talk about that now. Otherwise, again, you can stop the video, and what really matters we've talked about already in the basic section. But big picture, in my mind, what separates an intern from a medical student is that the intern covers more patients um, in slightly less depth than a medical student, and the intern actually has to take care of the work of the service in terms of putting in all the notes, putting in all the orders, etc. So, what you can do to be more intern like, I'd say the first step is just to understand what the plans are for not just your patient, but the entire service. And this goes back to that list again. So, your list, the sheet of paper with patient X, patient Y, etc. Instead of just putting in little boxes with plans for your patient, patient X, do the same thing for patient Y and do the same thing for patient Z. This is going to get you a lot more reps of understanding, like, okay, in this situation I see we do this plan, in this situation we do this plan, etc. Then once you've written down the plans, then you can go back and see, did the plans get followed through? Oh, this person got their CT scan, I can check this off the list. This person got their antibiotics, I can check this off the list. And pretty soon you'll realize that it's actually not that much work to be following an entire service worth of patients throughout the day and ensuring that all the little tasks involved with them being on the floor get done. Um, Again, not just for your patients. Then, once you've done that, you can even start updating your team. Oh, I noticed that so and so CT scan's done. I wasn't sure if you guys wanted to look at it, etc. All right, and then a few more advanced details about being the intern. I only recommend this for students that are interested in surgery because this is really how you would prepare to be a surgery intern. And paradoxically, what I recommend is, for example, in your fourth year acting internship or sub internship, that you deliberately take some time away from the operating room. And instead of being in the operating room, because you've already figured out that you've seen that, you like that, you want to pursue a career in the operating room, now you need to go back and figure out, okay, what is the work actually involved in taking care of those patients outside the OR, which is, again, what you'd be doing as the intern. So take that time away from the OR to shadow either the intern or some of the APPs and see exactly what floor work they spend their time doing during the day, how they do it, how it gets done, etc. You can also carry the intern's pager for a bit. If you and the intern are in the same room, they'll often let you hold the pager, and then you can see what sort of pages come in across the line, and then you could see if you could answer that page, and if you couldn't, then ask the intern how they would answer it, and you can again just kind of see how the work gets done in real time. And finally, if you have residents that are willing and able, you can put in some orders, at least in certain systems that the residents can co-sign. Again, this is just another way to get the reps in of how the work actually gets done, which is unfortunately more and more something that you can't actually do until you're an intern and then you're asked to do all of it at once. All right, so this was quite a bit of information. Again, when you're just starting as a medical student, I want you to just focus on those basics. Don't even begin to think about any of the advanced topics, but do those well, and you will do an excellent job on your rotation and hopefully learn quite a bit as well. We are truly happy to share our field with you as learners, and um, we do hope you learn something valuable in your time with us, no matter what your future career plans are. That's it. Thanks. Bye.